Good morning. Welcome to today's story, a touching, humane, and educational tale.
If the whole town had known that the girl they watched get thrown out in the heat would one day become the only reason their children could breathe, their elders could rest, and their neighbors could survive, maybe someone would have spoken up that afternoon. But nobody did. And that was how 19-year-old June Carter walked out of her aunt's trailer with one duffel bag, a rusted toolbox, a few packets of seeds, and a silence so loud it followed her all the way to the edge of Dry Creek. This story is about more than survival. It is about quiet skills, self-respect, and the kind of strength people overlook until they need it. It shows how preparation, dignity, and compassion can rebuild a life long before anyone else believes it can. By noon, the Arizona sun had turned the trailer park road white with glare. Everything looked bleached out. The gravel, the sagging fences, the rusted lawn chairs, even the people standing outside seemed washed thin by heat and habit. Like they had seen too many hard scenes and learned how to stand still through all of them. June Carter stood on the narrow metal steps outside her aunt's trailer, one hand wrapped around the strap of an old duffel bag, the other hanging stiff at her side. She had not cried, not yet. Her Aunt Linda stood in the doorway with the screen door pushed wide, one hand on her hip, jaw set hard like dry concrete. "You're old enough," Linda said. "I fed you. I housed you. I did my part." June looked past her, into the dim trailer she had spent the last 4 years trying not to take up too much space in. Her little corner by the laundry closet was already stripped bare. The blanket was gone. The paperback novels were gone. Even the chipped mug she used every morning had disappeared from the sink. It was strange what hurt. Not the yelling, not the accusation, not even the words. It was the speed of it. Like she had been erased before she was fully out the door. "I was working," June said quietly. "I gave you every check except gas money." Linda crossed her arms tighter. "And it still wasn't enough. I'm selling this place before it sinks me too. I'm not dragging dead weight into another year." A few people from nearby trailers watched from the shade of their awnings. No one interrupted. No one said Linda was wrong. No one said June had spent half her teenage years doing night shifts at the roadside diner, patching broken vents, fixing leaky faucets, and paying bills that did not even have her name on them. Dry Creek was that kind of town. Folks would bring a casserole after a funeral. They would honk when they passed you on Main. They would say praying for you at the feed store. But when trouble turned expensive or uncomfortable or inconvenient, most people got real quiet. June bent, picked up the last box at her feet and tucked it under her arm. It held 3 mason jars of dried beans, a roll of duct tape, 2 t-shirts, a flashlight, and a small bundle of seed packets tied with a rubber band. Tomato, beans, squash, basil. Her father's handwriting was still faintly visible on the back of one packet. "Plant after last frost. Watch the morning light." Her throat tightened. That was the first thing that nearly broke her. Not being thrown out, not the humiliation, just those crooked blue letters from a man who had been gone 5 years and still somehow sounded more like home than anything behind that screen door. Then came the soft thump of paws on metal. Blue. The mud had slipped out from under the trailer again. He was a dusty little thing with one bent ear, white paws, and the restless loyalty of a dog that had decided, for reasons nobody understood, that June was his person. He stopped beside her with his tongue out, ribs showing, tail wagging once like he was asking the simplest question in the world. "We leaving?" June swallowed hard and nodded. "Guess so," she murmured. Linda sighed like even that annoyed her. "Don't bring that dog back here either." June adjusted the bag on her shoulder. For a second, she stood completely still. Not because she was waiting for permission, not because she thought someone might stop her, but because some small, bruised part of her had one last foolish hope that a voice would rise up from somewhere behind her. "June, wait. June, come stay with us. June, this isn't right." Nothing came. Only the buzz of heat, only the creak of a loose awning, only the low hum of traffic far off on Route 89. So she walked, past the mailboxes with peeling numbers, past the ditch where kids sometimes hunted lizards in spring, past the hand-painted sign that said Dry Creek Mobile Estates, though there was nothing estate about any of it. She did not look back. The town opened around her in long, tired stretches. A shuttered gas station, a church with faded white siding, A diner where she had worked 6 mornings a week since she was 16. 2 cottonwoods near the schoolyard, both hanging limp in the heat. Everything in Dry Creek looked like it was waiting for rain that never quite came. June kept walking until the homes thinned out and the road widened. Blue trotted beside her in bursts, sometimes running ahead, sometimes circling back. Her duffel dug into her shoulder. Sweat slipped down her back. Her boots kicked up red dust with every step. She had $63 in cash, no car, no plan she trusted, and nowhere she could go without owing someone something. That last part mattered more than the rest. June had learned early that some help came with strings, some with shame, some with a bill that showed up later. So she kept moving toward the edge of town, where the land flattened into dry lots, wire fences, and forgotten things. That was when she saw it. The old roadside nursery. It sat a little way off the highway behind a leaning sign that once read, "Carter's Garden and Supply," though half the paint had peeled off years ago. The greenhouse panels were clouded and cracked. Shade cloth hung in tatters from one side. A chain-link gate sagged open like it had given up on staying closed. Rows of empty planting tables stood under layers of dust and blown leaves. Most people in Dry Creek passed it without a glance. To them, it was an eyesore. To June, it was something else. She stopped at the gate. Blue slipped through first. Her father had brought her here when she was little, back when the place still smelled like damp soil and tomato vines. Before the debts, before the hospital bills, before grief got sorted into boxes and sold off piece by piece. He used to show her how to listen to old pipes, how to tell when a pump was straining, how to shade seedlings without starving them of light. Plants will tell you what they need, he used to say. Most living things do. Trouble is, not many people slow down enough to notice. June stepped through the gate. The gravel crunched under her boots. The air inside the broken nursery felt no cooler than the road, but it felt different. Still, held. Like the place had been empty a long time, but not dead. She set down the box and looked around slowly. A rusted watering wand near the potting bench. Collapsed flat stacked by the wall. A rain barrel tipped on its side. A work table with one good leg and one leg braced by brick. It was a mess. A stubborn, sun-beaten, half-fallen apart mess. And for the first time all day, June did not feel like the most discarded thing in sight. She crouched near the threshold of the main greenhouse and ran her fingers across the dusty frame. Blue nosed around the back lot, then returned with his tail wagging and a dry mesquite twig in his mouth like he was already moving in. June let out a laugh before she could stop it. It was small, ragged, but real. By evening, the light turned gold across the broken panels. She found an old utility sink that still dripped when she turned the handle just right. She swept out one corner with a branch broom missing half its bristles. She stacked a few feed sacks into something that might pass for bedding. She shared half a can of beans with Blue and ate the rest with a plastic spoon from the diner wrapped in a napkin in her bag. When the sky deepened into purple and the heat finally loosened its grip, June sat on the concrete step outside the greenhouse and looked out toward the highway. Cars passed. People went home. Porch lights blinked on one by one in the distance. Nobody knew where she was. Nobody came looking. That should have felt like the end of something. Instead, sitting there with dust on her jeans, a dog at her feet, and her father's seed packets in her lap, June felt the faintest stir of something she had not allowed herself in a long time. Not comfort, not safety, not yet, but purpose. She looked back at the nursery, at the busted shade frames, at the dry beds, at the skeleton of a place everybody else had written off. Then she glanced down at the seeds in her hand. "All right," she whispered into the evening air, as if speaking to the land, or to her father, or maybe just to herself. "Let's see what's still alive." The next morning, June woke before sunrise because the heat had never fully left. It had only thinned out for a few hours, enough to let her sleep in patches, curled on feed sacks with Blue pressed against her boots. By 5:30, the sky over Dry Creek had turned that pale desert blue that always looked gentle before the day turned brutal. A mockingbird chattered somewhere out by the fence line. Far off, a truck groaned down the highway. The world was waking up, and June already had dirt on her hands. She stood in the middle of the old nursery lot, squinting across the damage in the thin morning light. Up close, the place looked even rougher than it had the night before. The shade cloth had torn loose in 3 places. Half the greenhouse panels were cracked or fogged over with years of dust. The irrigation lines lay brittle and split across the ground like dead snakes. One potting bench leaned hard to the left, and the back storage shed had a roof line that dipped low enough to make a person nervous. Still, it was hers for now. Not by deed, not by law, not by anybody's blessing, but by presence, by need, by the simple fact that she was the only one standing there willing to work. June set her father's old toolbox on the potting table and flipped it open. The hinges squealed. Insides had a crescent wrench, 2 screwdrivers, pliers worn smooth at the grips, a pipe cutter, electrical tape, and a handful of odd bolts and washers he had always sworn would come in handy one day. She could almost hear his voice. Don't start with what's impossible. Start with what leaks. Start with what sticks. Start with what can still be saved. So she did. She spent the first hour clearing the entrance. Broken pots, blown trash, dry branches, a bent metal sign frame half buried in dust. Blue followed her the whole time, nose busy, tail ticking back and forth like a metronome. Every now and then he would disappear behind the shed, then come back proud of himself for finding something useless. An old glove, a stick, a faded rag. By 8 o'clock, sweat had dampened the back of June's shirt. By 9, it was running down her spine. She moved to the water line next. There was an old spigot beside the utility sink she had found the night before. The drip was slow and stubborn, but it was something. She crouched beside the pipe, wiped off the dirt, checked the fitting, then tightened the joint with the wrench. The drip slowed, then stopped. June stared at it for half a second. Then she turned the handle back slowly. A weak sputter came first, then a cough of brown water, then a thin, trembling stream. Not much, but enough to make her let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Hey, Blue," she said softly, almost smiling. "We've got a pulse." Blue barked once as if he agreed. That little stream changed the whole morning. Now the place wasn't just shelter. It was possibility. June dragged over old buckets and cracked tubs and started catching every drop she could. She found 2 barrels behind the shed, rinsed them out as best she could, and set them under the patched gutter line. She rigged a piece of broken hose to redirect runoff from the sink. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't efficient, but it worked. And out here, worked mattered more than pretty. Around 10, a pickup rolled up slow beside the road. June looked up. For 1/10 second, she thought it might be Aunt Linda. Or worse, somebody coming to tell her to leave. Instead, it was Mabel Reed. Mabel was somewhere in her 70s, with silver hair pinned up loose, a sun-faded denim shirt, and the kind of face that looked soft until it didn't. She had run the little seat and hardware shop on Main Street for more than 30 years, and people in Dry Creek tended to listen when she spoke, mostly because Mabel never wasted words. She climbed down from her truck holding a brown paper sack. June straightened slowly. "Morning," Mabel said. "Morning." Mabel looked past her at the nursery, at the swept walkway, at the stacked debris, at the buckets already half filling near the sink. Then she nodded once. "Looks better with somebody in it." June didn't know what to say to that. Mabel held out the paper sack. "Brought biscuits and 2 peaches that needed eating today, not tomorrow." June hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know I don't." Mabel's tone was matter-of-fact. "That's what makes it kindness instead of obligation." June took the bag. The warmth of it surprised her more than it should have. "Thank you." Mabel tipped her chin toward the back of the property. "You check the hand pump behind the shed?" June frowned. "There's a hand pump?" "There used to be. Your daddy had a backup well line put in after that dry spell back in 2009. Most folks forgot. He didn't." Something moved in June's chest at the mention of him. Not sharp grief this time. Something steadier, like being handed back a piece of herself. She followed Mabel around the shed, and there it was. Rusted, half hidden by weeds, leaning a little, but still there. June wiped the handle with her palm. "You think it still works?" Mabel shrugged. "Only one way to find out." It took effort. The first few pumps did nothing but groan. Then came a shudder through the pipe, a spit of mud, another creak, and then water. Cold, cloudy at first, but real. June stepped back, stunned. Mabel gave the smallest smile. "Your father believed in backup plans. Smart man." For a moment, June couldn't speak. She just stared at the water falling into the dust, darkening the earth at her feet. The nursery didn't feel abandoned anymore. It felt waiting. By noon, June had a new rhythm. Clean, sort, surrey, patch, test, save. She stretched a torn piece of shade cloth over the least damaged frame and tied it down with baling wire. She salvaged 3 planting trays that weren't cracked clean through. She found a box of old clay pots in the shed and set aside the ones that could still hold soil. She even cleared off one corner of the main workbench and laid out the seed packets in careful little rows, as if order itself could give her strength. And maybe it could, because for the first time in a long while, June didn't feel like a girl who had been thrown away. She felt useful. Tired, yes. Hot, absolutely. Alone, mostly, but useful. That afternoon, as the desert wind picked up and pushed dust along the road, Cal Turner drove by in his shiny truck and slowed just enough to grin through the open window. "Well, look at that," he called. "Girls out here playing farmer in a graveyard." June didn't answer. Cal laughed to himself and drove on. The words landed. Of course they did. But not the way they might have yesterday. Because now there was water in the line, water in the backup pump, buckets in the shade, tools on the bench, a place beginning quietly to answer her back. By evening, June planted her first tray. Just beans. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic. She pressed each seed into the soil with careful, dusty fingers, then covered them lightly and set the tray where the late sun wouldn't scorch it. Blue lay nearby with his head on his paws. Watching her like this, too, mattered. And maybe it did. June sat back on her heels and looked across the nursery as the light softened gold around the broken frames and patched shade cloth. It still wasn't much. Not yet. But it wasn't dead. Neither was she. And somewhere deep inside that tired, sun-baked place, something had begun. By the end of the week, the nursery no longer looked like a graveyard. It still looked rough, still weather-beaten, still one hard wind away from losing half the shade cloth June had tied down with her own blistered hands. But it no longer looked forgotten. The walkways were cleared. The sink worked. The backup pump still groaned like an old man getting out of church pews, but it gave water when she asked for it. And in 3 black trays near the east wall, the first bean sprouts had begun to push through the soil, pale green, tender, stubborn. June noticed them just after sunrise. She crouched low, one hand braced on her knee, and stared at those tiny curled stems like they were proof of something bigger than plants. Blue padded over and sat beside her. "Well," she whispered, smiling before she meant to, "look at you." For a few seconds, the whole world felt quiet in the right way. Not empty, not lonely, just still. Then the heat came. It rose fast that day. By 9 in the morning, the air already felt wrong. Too thick, too bright, too sharp against the skin. By noon, the highway outside the nursery rippled in silver waves. Even the wind felt baked. June stood beneath the patched shade cloth, wiping sweat from the back of her neck, when she heard the first siren in town. Then another. Then the distant groan of people shouting over engines. She stepped out to the gate and looked toward Dry Creek. A haze hung over Main Street. Not smoke, dust. The kind that kicked up when too many vehicles moved too fast and too many people suddenly stopped pretending everything was under control. By early afternoon, word made its way down the highway in pieces. The power grid had failed. Too many air conditioners. Too many old transformers. Too much strain on a town that had spent years patching over problems instead of fixing them. Dry Creek was out. No power at the diner. No power at the school gym. No power at the clinic annex. And with no power came a second problem. The town's main water booster system had stalled. Then a pressure break near the older lines muddied part of the supply. Nobody knew yet what was safe, what wasn't, or how long any of it would last. June stood at the sink, filling buckets, listening to the faraway hum of panic. She knew that kind of town silence. It wasn't really silence. It was the sound of everybody becoming aware, all at once, that their routines had been doing more for them than they ever admitted. She looked around the nursery. Shade. Water. Air moving through broken panels she had propped open just right. Cooler ground beneath the cloth. Not comfortable exactly, but survivable. A little while later, a pickup came flying off the road so fast it spit gravel against the chain-link fence. June straightened. Blue barked. The driver's door opened, and Nora Bell stepped out carrying her son. Nora was the kind of woman who always looked half a step behind her own life. Young, worn out, trying hard, usually with a grocery list in one hand and worry in the other. Her son, Mason, couldn't have been older than 7. His face was flushed red. His little chest moved too fast. Nora pushed sweaty hair off her forehead and looked at June with an expression that was part fear, part pride, part shame. "He can't catch his breath," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. June's eyes went to the boy immediately. Mason was wheezing. Not dramatic, not theatrical. Just that terrifying, tight little sound that told the truth faster than any grown-up would. "What happened?" June asked, already moving toward them. "His inhaler's running low. The pharmacy's shut. My place is like an oven. He keeps coughing every time the dust blows in." Nora swallowed hard. Somebody said this place was cooler. Somebody. June almost asked who. Then she remembered it didn't matter. What mattered was the child in Nora's arms. Nora must have seen something shift in her face, because she rushed to fill the silence. "I know I said things before," she blurted out. "About you being out here. About this place. I know that. But I'm not here for me, June. I'm here because he's scared, and I don't know what else to do." There it was. Not an apology polished up to sound pretty. Just the truth. Messy. Late. Human. June felt something old and bruised stir inside her. She remembered the trailer park. The eyes that slid away. The town that found it easier to watch than to help. She remembered Nora among them. Not cruel exactly. Just quiet. And sometimes quiet did damage all its own. For one heartbeat, maybe two, June stood there with all of it inside her. The hurt. The heat. The simple, bitter chance to say no. Then Mason coughed again, sharp and dry, and folded against his mother's shoulder. That settled it. "Bring him inside," June said. Nora blinked. "What?" "Inside," June repeated, already turning. "Main greenhouse, east side, it's cooler there." She led them under the patched shade cloth and into the section where air moved best between the open panels. The temperature dropped just enough to matter. Not by miracles, by degrees. Sometimes a few degrees could save somebody. June grabbed a clean rag from the sink, soaked it in pump water, wrung it out, and handed it to Nora. "Lay this on the back of his neck. Small sips of water. Not too fast." Nora did exactly as she was told. Blue lay down near Mason's feet as if he understood the room needed gentleness. Little by little, the boy's breathing eased. Not all at once. Not like in the movies. Just slowly. The way real fear leaves, 1 inch at a time. Nora sat on an overturned bucket, eyes glassy with exhaustion. She looked around at the barrels, the patched cloth, the trays of seedlings, the careful order June had built out of scraps and heat and grit. "You made this work," she said softly, almost to herself. June kept her hands busy, adjusting the cloth, checking the water line. "I made it livable." Nora looked at her then. Really looked. Not at the girl people whispered about. Not at the niece who got thrown out. Not at the stubborn loner in the old nursery. At June. At what she had done. At what that work meant now. Before either of them could say more, another vehicle turned into the lot. Then another. June stepped toward the gate, heart thudding low in her chest. From the road, she could already see them. Neighbors. Families. An old man from the hardware store. A teenage girl holding a box fan that didn't matter anymore. 2 mothers with damp towels around their babies' shoulders. Somebody had told the town. And now the same people who had once watched her walk away with one duffel bag were looking at the nursery like it might be the only safe place left in Dry Creek. June stood there in the hard white heat, hands damp, pulse steadying into something she couldn't quite name. The real test had arrived. And this time, the whole town was at her gate. By sundown, the nursery was full. Not crowded in the loud, restless way of a county fair. Crowded in the careful way people get when they are tired, overheated, and trying not to panic in front of one another. June moved through it all with a kind of steady urgency. She opened the side greenhouse first, then the back shade lane. She dragged out old benches, turned empty soil bins into seats, laid feed sacks across the warmest patches of concrete so the older folks wouldn't have to sit directly on the ground. She set the cleanest buckets near the pump line. One for drinking water, one for cooling cloths, one for washing hands. Simple rules. Clear rules. That was the only way this was going to work. Kids, stay under shade. Small sips first, not big gulps. If somebody gets dizzy, tell me right away. If you brought water, set it here so we can count what we have. Nobody argued. That was the strange part. These were the same people who had once looked right through her. Now they listened when she pointed. They waited when she told them to. They moved when she needed space cleared. Fear had a way of teaching people who actually knew what they were doing. Nora stayed near the east wall with Mason, helping the little ones keep cool with damp rags. Mabel arrived an hour later with 2 boxes of canned peaches, salt crackers, and every extra hand towel she could find in her house. "I figured if the town was finally coming to its senses," she said dryly, setting the boxes down, "somebody ought to bring snacks." Even June smiled at that. The heat outside kept pressing harder. By late afternoon, the air beyond the nursery fence had turned brutal, bright, flat, punishing. Inside it was still hot, but the shade cloth, the open cross-vent panels, and the damp concrete near the waterline made just enough difference to matter. A few degrees, a little airflow, some order in the middle of disorder. Sometimes that was the difference between people holding together and falling apart. June didn't stop moving. She checked on the older men from down by the feed store. She had a teenage boy help her prop open the west panels with broken broom handles to keep the air circulating. She showed two mothers how to wrap wet cloth around wrists and necks for their toddlers. She even rationed the water without making it feel cruel, because panic grew faster when people felt they were losing something. "Everybody gets enough," she said more than once. Not plenty, enough. The words mattered. So did the tone, because people could hear the truth in a voice before they trusted the plan behind it. For a few brief hours, the nursery became more than a shelter. It became a rhythm, a place where someone was watching, a place where someone had prepared, a place where the frightened could borrow calm from the person standing nearest the problem. But trouble rarely stays outside once it realizes people are finding a way through. Just before sunset, a black truck rolled into the lot. Shiny, cold-looking, out of place among the dust and sweating families. Cal Turner stepped out wearing pressed jeans, dark sunglasses, and the expression of a man who still thought every crisis was an opportunity if you were ruthless enough. He looked around the nursery once, taking in the people, the shade, the water barrels, the order June had built with her own hands. Then he gave a low whistle. "Well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "looks like this little scrapyard's become prime real estate." June turned slowly. Blue rose from beside the water buckets and stood at her leg. Cal walked farther in without asking. "You can't run this by yourself," he said. "Too many people, too much liability. Somebody gets sick, passes out, sues the town. This whole thing turns into a mess." June held his gaze. "Then don't make it one." A few people nearby went quiet. Cal smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm trying to help," he said. "I've got 2 portable generators and a refrigerated storage unit at my warehouse. I can bring supplies in, set up charge stations, maybe even make this place official." June knew that tone. Men like Cal always said official when they meant under my control. "What do you want in return?" she asked. He lifted one shoulder. "Access, oversight, a fair say in how this place is used." Mabel, who had been folding towels near the sink, gave a small snort. Cal ignored her. Then came the part he should have left unsaid. "Truth is," he went on, "a 19-year-old girl sleeping in a busted greenhouse isn't exactly the face people are going to trust for long." The nursery stilled. Even the children seemed quieter. June felt the words land. Not because they were new, because they were old. So old she could have said them for him. Too young, too poor, too alone, too easy to dismiss. For a moment, the hurt rose hot and familiar in her throat. Then another voice cut across the greenhouse. "That 19-year-old girl is the reason your customers aren't dropping in their kitchens right now." It was Ethan Pike. He had come in so quietly June hadn't noticed him at first. The deputy mayor looked tired, shirt damp through at the collar, hair flattened by sweat. But his voice, for once, did not waver. He stepped forward and faced the crowd as much as Cal. "I went by the school gym," Ethan said. "It's hotter than a tin can. The church basement's packed and the backup units failed 2 hours ago. This," he turned slightly, looking at the patched shade cloth, the barrels, the open vents, the organized stations. "This is the most stable cooling point in town." Cal scoffed. "That doesn't mean she should be in charge of it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "No," he said. "The fact that she built it before the rest of us admitted we had a problem is what means she should be." A murmur moved through the nursery, soft at first, then stronger. Nora stood up from beside Mason. "She took my boy in first," she said, "before any of you showed up." An older man near the back added, "She got my wife cooled down when her blood pressure started climbing." Another voice rose, then another. Nothing dramatic, nothing polished, just truth spoken out loud, one person at a time. Cal looked around and realized too late that the room had shifted. Not because June begged for trust, not because she won an argument, because people had seen enough with their own eyes. June stood in the middle of it, dusty, exhausted, shirt damp with sweat, hands marked by wire and dirt and work. She did not look powerful. She looked useful. And in a town fighting heat, fear, and pride all at once, useful carried more weight than powerful ever could. Cal slid his sunglasses off. glanced around one last time, and seemed to understand he wasn't taking this place from her tonight. Not with all these witnesses, not with all this proof. He muttered something under his breath, turned, and walked back toward his truck. The moment he left, the nursery exhaled. But June didn't. Not fully. Because she knew better. The night wasn't over. The heat wasn't over. And neither was what this place was becoming. Still, as she looked around at the people under her shade cloth, people drinking from her buckets, following her rules, trusting her hands, she felt something shift deep inside. Not revenge. Not triumph. Something steadier than that. The quiet, hard-earned knowledge that no one could call her useless anymore, unless they were willing to lie in front of the whole town. By the third day, the worst of the heat had finally begun to loosen its grip on Dry Creek. Not all at once, not kindly, just enough for people to notice that the wind no longer felt like it had come straight off a stove burner, and that breathing, for the first time in days, did not feel like work. The power came back in pieces. A hum here, a porch light there. The diner's sign flickered late that afternoon, buzzed twice, then steadied. Folks standing near the highway actually clapped when they saw it. But even after the lights returned, people did not rush out of the nursery right away. They lingered, quietly, like they understood that what had held them together in those brutal hours had not been electricity. It had been care. It had been order. It had been one stubborn young woman who had turned a broken place into shelter before anyone else admitted they might need one. June did not stand in the middle of it expecting thanks. That was not her way. She spent that morning rinsing buckets, folding damp towels over the fence line, checking the seedlings, and repairing a sag in the shade cloth that had pulled loose in the night. Blue followed her from one corner of the nursery to the next, stopping every so often to lie in the patch of shade nearest her boots. The nursery was quieter now, tired, used, but alive, very alive. Mabel came by first, carrying a box of mason jars and a paper sack full of sandwich bread. She set both down on the workbench and looked around slowly, taking in the people helping clean up, the children carrying empty cups, the old men restacking crates. "Well," she said with that dry little edge in her voice, "looks like you didn't just save plants after all." June gave a small laugh. "No, ma'am. No, you surely did not." A little later, Nora walked over with Mason beside her. The boy looked better now. Still worn out, still pale around the eyes, but breathing easy. That alone made something in June's chest soften. Nora stopped in front of her and held out a folded dish towel. One of the good ones June had let her use on that first desperate afternoon. "I washed it," Nora said. June took it gently. "You didn't have to." Nora nodded, eyes shining a little. "I know." There was that phrase again, the one that meant more because it was chosen. Not owed, not forced, chosen. Mason looked up at June, then down at Blue, then back at her. "My mom said you saved me." June crouched so she was level with him. "No," she said softly. "Your mom got you where you needed to be. That's what saved you." Mason thought about that with the grave seriousness only a child could manage, then reached down and patted Blue on the head. By evening, Ethan Pike returned with 2 members of the town council. This time, he did not come looking uncertain. He came looking honest. They stood with June near the old Carter's Garden and Supply sign, while the sun lowered into a wide orange band over the road. Ethan cleared his throat. "The council voted this afternoon," he said. "We want to offer you a long-term lease on the nursery property. $1 a year for the first 5 years, with restoration support from the town if you agree to keep this place operating as a community cooling garden and emergency shelter." June stared at him. For a moment, she could not speak. This land had once belonged to her father in everything but paperwork. Then grief took it. Debt took it. Time took it. And now somehow, life had carried it back to her in a form she never would have imagined. Not as charity, as respect. Ethan shifted, then added more quietly, "We should have seen what you were worth sooner." That was as close to a public apology as Dry Creek was likely to get. It was enough. June looked out over the nursery, at the patched frames, at the barrels, at the seedlings pushing green through dark soil, at the mothers gathering their things, at the older folks resting on benches built from scraps, at Blue trotting through the aisle like he owned every inch of the place. And then she understood something simple and deep. She had been thrown out of one home, but in the wreckage of that loss, she had built something larger than a home for herself. She had built a place people could count on, a place that answered fear with steadiness, a place that gave shade when the world turned cruel. That kind of place mattered. That kind of person mattered too. Weeks later, once the town had settled and the hottest stretch of summer had passed, the nursery began to change again. Volunteers helped repair the west wall. Mabel donated heirloom seeds from the back shelf of her store. Nora came twice a week with Mason to help water the beds. Even teenagers from town showed up now and then, learning how to patch lines, stretch cloth, and keep plants alive in hard ground. The old sign was repainted. Not fancy, just clean, just clear. Carter's Community Garden. June stood beneath it one evening with dirt on her hands and golden light catching in her hair. She was still the same girl who had walked out with one duffel bag. Still quiet, still sturdy, still more comfortable doing the work than talking about it. But now the town saw what had been there all along. And maybe that is the lesson, isn't it? How often do we misjudge the quiet ones? How often do we overlook the people who are building strength in private, just because they are not loud enough to impress us? And when life gets hard, who really saves a community? The richest voice in the room? Or the most reliable hands? If this story moved you, let me know in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated and then surprised everyone, including yourself? And if you believe quiet strength, resilient hearts, and second chances still matter in this world, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for the next story.